This absolute weapon is the new Merida Reacto, the 4th generation. It's the team bike of Bahrain McLaren and Mark Cavendish. And as a 4th generation aero bike, it's evolved significantly over the 1st. It's got sleeker, more aerodynamic and lighter too. It's only around 7.1 kilograms without pedals, this bike. You can see the cockpit here is now all integrated, the cables neatly hidden inside the stem and routed through the head tube. There's also been little tweaks and improvements to tube shapes and the aerodynamic profiles of them. There's these little areas on the bottom of the fork that help improve aerodynamics slightly. And also, we've lost a big fork crown bump that used to be on the previous bike, and I really like how that just smooths out the lines of the bike. It looks very nice indeed. But perhaps the biggest improvement we've seen to the Merida Reacto and other aero bikes is an increase in comfort. But perhaps the biggest improvement that's been made to 4th generation aero bikes like the Reacto over 1st generation ones, and this applies across all aero bikes, is improvements in comfort. And this has been achieved by better understanding the carbon layups employed in the frames and using fibres in ways that you can then dampen road noise and vibration. Also introducing compliance features such as this rubber insert in the seat post, which allows greater deflection of the seat post to absorb bumps, and also tyre clearance. I mean, the tyre clearance on this bike is up to 30 millimeters now, and you can see down there it's massive. I mean, you fit a bus through that, and as a result, road bikes, well, aero road bikes, have become significantly more comfortable. The first ones were often regarded as being very harsh to ride and had a reputation for beating you up on long rides and not being very comfortable. But since those early days of the aero bike, we've even seen aero bikes win races like Paris-Roubaix. Now that that's been addressed, I can see very little reason in my mind not to own an aero bike. And I'm very fortunate in that I have lots of different types of bikes, but I am adamant that if I could only own one bike, it would without question be an aero bike with disc brakes. Now I get that aero bikes are faster, but I don't ride very fast, so aerodynamic doesn't matter to me. Who are you? I'm you, beginner you, when you started cycling. Right. Well, I guess it's time we did some experiments to find out. But you can put your, well, sunglasses over your helmet straps for a start. I'm going to ride the new Reacto on our GCN test course. This course is a 13-kilometre out and back and features a significant climb, some flat, some rolling terrain and a rapid descent. Myself and beginner me are going to ride a total of 4 times in both aero and non-aero setups. Beginner me is wearing, well, baggy shorts and a baggy jacket and will be riding in a non-aero position. More experienced me will ride in as an aerodynamic position as possible and wear tight-fitting clothing. We will time all the runs and keep the power consistent. This is the start of our test track, and I'm going to ride it first wearing the aero clothing and trying to hold an aerodynamic position, and I'm going to aim to average 150 watts using the power meter that comes with the bike. This power output is typical of what many beginner cyclists can do and will mean that I'm travelling at a slower speed. I'm then going to repeat this test, but beginner me's going to do it in the baggy non-aerodynamic clothing, riding a non-aero position, and we'll compare the times for the same power output. Now, before I do it, I think we should have a poll. You click on screen now, you can vote. Will aerodynamics make any difference at all at this low power and relatively low speed? Vote now. Right, let's do it. 3, 2, 1, go. It's nice riding like this. One thing I think it's important you never forget is, you know, where you started. And when I started riding a bike, this is probably what I would do. I'm on one of the steeper sections of this climb now, and in order to do 140 watts, I'm in the easiest gear on this bike. I'm having to do 40 RPM cadence. So grinding a fair bit, but at least the power's low. And my speed right now is only 6 kilometers an hour. That's a fast walk. So, I mean, I very much doubt that at this point on the test course, aerodynamics is contributing a great deal. Right, we're at the top of the climb now, onto the flat section, and already at my 150 watts target pace, starting to really pick up some speed. Oh, yeah, really starting to take off now. That's mad. Something that's crazy is that anyone that's ever ridden an aero bike, I can tell you this, but they are noticeably faster, even without measuring anything. If you go from riding a standard bike to an aero bike, I mean, I challenge you not to be able to feel the difference. Ooh, I've even gone into the big ring. Still ticking along at just 150 watts. This is ridiculous, like 40k an hour. Although I think I've got a tailwind. Right, first run non-aero, 150 watts, 3, 2, 1. Go! Ooh, it's blooming weird weather today. It's supposed to be summer in the United Kingdom, by the way. But there's a lot of wind and it keeps blowing in rain and then drying it up and blowing it out. But for this wet run, I'm quite glad I've got this nice big warm jacket on, to be honest. On this first steep section on the climb on our test course, I'm traveling so slowly, around 6 kilometers an hour. It looks the same as it was with the aero kit on, but I'd kind of expect that. At this speed, I'm not expecting aerodynamics to make any difference, really. Can't believe this is summer, can you? Bloody hell. Oh, it's steep, this bit. 40 RPM cadence. Right, that's the hill out of the way. And now again, still picking up speed on the flat pretty quickly. Even at just 150 watts, it's amazing how quick you can go on the flat. Something I feel quite strongly about that I should point out is the purpose of this experiment is not to laugh at beginner cyclists. Far from it. We were all beginners once, myself included, and there was a time when I was first starting out in road cycling where I would have looked at, you know, an aero bike and thought, you know, oh, I don't need one of those, I'm not fast enough, or perhaps I'm not good enough to have one. Well, I say, if you can afford one and you want one, get one. That's rubbish that you're not good enough to have one. Arguably, I'm still not good enough to have one. I'm never going to win the Tour. But it's fun. Get what you like. Averaging 154 watts about halfway through the test run, and ticking along nicely. Keep air raw. Now we're coming up to the descent on my first run, and I'm not going to pedal on the descent. I've got a point on the course where I'm just going to stop pedaling, and I'm going to do that for all the runs, because this is a very fast descent, and yeah, I don't want to be trying to hold even 150 watts on this descent. It's quick. Blooming windy up here. Oh, getting blown around with my jacket on. It's like a parachute. I'm like the shuttle attempting re-entry. So I've done my first 2 easy runs now, 150 watts. Now time to ride up here hard and see what difference that makes. But I can't go too hard because whatever I do on this run, I've got to replicate in the baggies. So, right, Here we go, 3, 2, 1. Oh, we're off.
Not doing too bad. 8 minutes in, 370 watts. Woo! Flying. 45k an hour now, coming up to 30 mile an hour. Really makes a difference. But it should do. Tanking along down it, I mean, over 50k an hour. That's over 30 miles an hour. Woo!
Final run, baggies, going out. 3, 2, 1, go.
Now, normally people don't think that aero matters that much on a climb, but when you're going hard on a climb that averages around 7% like this, it does. It really does. That's why you see the pros ride behind their domestiques in a train, even on the climbs. Shelter helps. This is so much slower. This is ridiculous. Same power output, and I'm doing 35k an hour, when on this stretch last time, I was doing 45. Demoralizing. It's really windy on this return leg, and every time a gust comes up, you just feel it so much more in this clothing. Woo! Feeling it now. Last little bit, and then the freewheel on the descent. Much quicker than the slow runs. But then the power output is double what I did on the slow runs. 300 watts average so far. Did a lot more on the climb, but have backed off on the other bit. Just coming into the ending of the fast lap, and a lorry's got in my way, which is a bit annoying, so I might have to crop the lap when I analyse it later. Real world testing for you, that.
Now, before I get onto the results, some of you might be asking, why didn't you test an aero bike versus a non-aero bike? Well, it's a good question, but unfortunately, given the time available we had to make this video, I wasn't able to get a bike like the Sculptura from Merida, their climbing bike, in time to do this. But also, we don't need to, because aero bikes are more aerodynamic than non-aero bikes. This is an indisputable fact. It's something that's been repeatedly shown and measured many times, in the same way that the speed of light is 2.98 times 10 to the 8 meters per second is an indisputable fact as well. And while the rider and the rider's position makes a greater overall impact on aerodynamic efficiency than the bike and the wheels are still measurable and still significant. So with that in mind, onto the results. Right, now first I wore the Aero clothing and did 150 watts average on the course, and that took me 33 minutes and 14 seconds. I averaged about 23 kilometers an hour and averaged 142 watts actually once the no pedaling descent was factored in. It dragged the average down a bit. Now once I put baggies on and did the same power, again I managed to average 142 watts. It took me 35.56. That's 162 seconds difference, which, I don't know about you, I think that's really big. The average speed difference, so 23 kilometers an hour versus 21.3 kilometers an hour with baggies. And the fascinating thing here is that when I compared the two efforts and analysed the flybys, even when I was crawling at about 6 kilometres an hour at moments on the climb at the start, the baggy clothing still appeared to be slowing me down, because on the climb I was around 10-12 seconds slower wearing the less aerodynamic clothing, which, well, I mean, that surprised me. I thought it wouldn't matter so much. But then as soon as I hit the sort of leveled off part of the course and started to pick up speed, the time gap just absolutely ballooned. It went out massively, and that's where the majority of the time difference occurred. Other interesting point is that then on the descent, on the way back down, I only lost again around 12 seconds on the descent. And this is because although I was traveling really fast and aerodynamic drag was making a huge difference, I was on the descent for such a short amount of time, only a sort of minute and a half. There wasn't enough time on the descent for the non-aerodynamic clothing to make a huge difference. But if you think about it, you know, 10 or 12 seconds, if you're trying to chase someone in a race or something, that's actually a really big time gap. So what about when I was traveling faster at the higher power? Well, on the first run in the Aero setup, I averaged 22 minutes and 7 seconds. That's 35 kilometers an hour average speed, and the average watts, once the descent was taken into account, was 260. Now, replicating this with baggy clothing, it took me 24 minutes and 51 seconds for the 12-kilometer course, which, interestingly, this is, for me, really interesting, was 164 seconds time difference. So on the first one, it was 162 seconds time difference. Very similar time difference on the two runs, despite one being, you know, really low power output and taking much longer, and the other being, you know, much higher power output. And there's an interesting rationale for this. I spoke to some aerodynamicists about it, and they say that when you're going faster, the wattage savings are much bigger. Drag, you know, starts to count for much more. But you're on the course for a shorter amount of time. So the slower athlete that rides at a slower speed isn't getting as big a wattage saving from their position or their equipment. But because they're on the course for a longer amount of time, that smaller saving is available to them for a longer amount of time. So therefore the overall is roughly the same, which, well, I think that's really interesting. I guess this means that even if you're not riding fast, aero matters. And in fact, if you're riding above 16 kilometers an hour or 10 miles an hour, aerodynamic drag is the biggest force that you need to overcome. Of course, the caveat being if you're on a steep climb, then gravity is also really big as well. But you get the idea. That aerodynamic drag is really important. And while position and the rider is the most important aspect of aero, the bike and the wheels are also hugely significant. Should we all go out and buy aero bikes then? Well, no, because aero bikes often have a much more aggressive geometry designed for racing, and this can mean that for beginner cyclists or less flexible riders, they can be quite uncomfortable to get into that aggressive position. They're also a lot less practical than a lot of other bikes as well. You know, by having all this slick integration and hidden cables, it's great for cheating the wind, but it can be a bit of a pain and not super practical. I mean, it's a bit like comparing a McLaren supercar versus a sort of family estate or station wagon, if you're from America. You know, great for racing on, but not especially great at going to the shops. But if you want to ride faster, then an aero bike is the way to go. And this is regardless of your ability. You don't need to be averaging 20 miles an hour on all your rides to justify one or for it to be beneficial to you. So the moral of the story is, well, ride whatever you like and just have fun. And I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next one.